What's up, y'all? Welcome back to From the Ground Up. Today, we're going to dig into a question I get asked often in my DMs, in the comments on some of my posts, in my clinical mastermind group. This idea, this concept, these questions tend to come up. And so I want to dive into it today and kind of share with you what I answer whenever I get asked, where the heck do I start? Where do I start? How do I know what to do with my pelvic floor patients? And it's funny because we're taught in kind of some of these level 1 courses, a quote unquote framework, but this framework that they're taught, or this methodology that we're taught, centers mainly around one of two things. It either centers around the diagnosis. So they have stress incontinence, they have prolapse, they have pelvic pain, and this is how you treat that thing. And you do this, this, and this. Or it's centered around this idea of weakness versus tension at the pelvic floor. And if it's weak, you do these things. And if it's tense, you do these things. And so I get people, replying on my posts, or they'll reply to my stories or send me a DM and ask me a question on a case or something like that. And a lot of times the generalized overview of these questions is, what do I do? How do I know what to do? How do I know where to start? And how do I know where to go with it? Especially when I see that there's like multiple constraints or kind of multiple drivers potentially to the patient's pelvic floor dysfunction, right? And so just the other day I put up a question box and I basically asked, like, what are you stuck on right now? Like, what are you mainly stuck on with your patients? And I kid you not, there was probably 3 or 4 that replied within 30 minutes, something about, well, I started here and I just don't know what to do next. Or I did the evaluation and I found these 3 things. And how do I know which one to tackle? And so the big idea around this is that you can't treat, first of all, you can't treat what you don't understand. And so finding the biggest constraint or the biggest driver of the pelvic floor dysfunction is the goal. And that starts with asking better questions, then choosing interventions that are aligned with what you found in the objective and aligned with the patient's dream outcome. Okay. And so in order to get away from these frameworks of treat the diagnosis, treat the weakness, or treat the tension, whatever the case may be, that really requires us to find the root cause. And, the root causes, sometimes there's multiple, which is really the drivers, the main constraints. But then even if you can find those things, we have to know, well, which one do I start with? And if I start with this one, when do I move to this one, right? And so I want to give you guys kind of the framework I use today to help me kind of organize my findings in evals, in re-evals, in assessments, all the things, and helps me kind of know what to do first and where to go from there. But y'all, we have to stop choosing our interventions simply based on tightness and weakness, or God forbid, the perf assessment, the perfect, whichever one you want to call it. Please stop using this assessment, and please stop choosing your intervention strategy based on the perf assessment. Just don't use it in general. Okay. So I want to walk you guys through my simple framework today. It starts with asking better questions. Okay. We have to be a better detective if we want better answers. Okay. And this includes things like symptom timeline. This includes life context. This is basically like when your symptoms started, I am going to ask you a million questions around what was going on at that time of your life. Did you have an injury? Was it a birth? Did you have a stressful time period in your life? Did you change jobs? Did you lose a job? Did you have gut dysfunction? I kind of want to start painting the picture around the symptom onset. Let's say they're here for pelvic pain, right? I'm not going to treat the pelvic pain. I need to figure out why the pelvic pain is happening. And in order to do that, I have to ask questions that will help me form kind of a hypothesis around what's probably going on and what's probably the main driver or the main constraint in this patient's body, okay? And I also want to point out, we can't just rely on the patient to tell us their story. We can't just say, okay, share everything with me. Tell me what's happening. That's one part of it. But we all have those patients that are like, oh, my pelvic floor just hurts and I just have pain and That's kind of all they tell you. And it's like you have to get better at these open-ended questions and at kind of guiding them through this process so that you can start to build your hypothesis of what you think is probably happening. We have to think like a detective, right? What is the story behind the symptoms? And that starts with how we ask and what questions we ask our patients. And one thing that I think a lot of people skip over is yes, we have to ask better questions. And yes, we have to start building the story behind the symptoms. But we also need to be very aware of our patient's dream outcome. And I love to ask this question. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it, what outcome would you have at the end of working with me? Right. And so I ask my patients that. I'm like, at the end of our time together, if you had everything you wanted, what does that look like? And this should guide the treatment that you provide. This should guide your treatment priorities. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more as we go. But you may find that their goals, their priorities that they want surprise you, and they might be different than yours. And that's okay because we need to be treating for their outcomes, not just treating their impairments that we find, right? Not just treating a tight right obturator internus muscle or a trigger point in the glute med or whatever it is that we find, right? We need to be aligning our choice for interventions based on their dream outcomes. So an example of this, right? I had a patient who was seeing me. She was training for a high rocks, which is, if you don't know what that is, it's like a fitness competition that's kind of like I don't know, it's like a crazy person thing. Fun fact, I did a high rocks team relay, which just about killed me. And I just did the team, which means I just did 2 of the events. But it's essentially like a functional fitness type event where you have 8 kind of strength or power moves that you do. And then in between each one, you run a long way. I forget how long it is, but it's like, I don't know, it's some amount that is more than I want to be running. I don't want to run any amount, so that's why. But my patient was training for a high rocks competition and she was seeing me for leaking and hip pain. And so she had put in her documentation that she had chronic hip pain and that she had just started leaking during her high rocks training because this is more intensity and more impact and more power than she was used to doing. And so in my head, before she even walked in for the evaluation, in my head, I'm like, okay, yeah, like she wants to stop peeing her pants. Like obviously she just started peeing her pants when she was training for this high rocks. And so obviously that's what she's going to want to stop doing. Well, as I started asking her more questions and asked her the magic wand question, I was like, listen, what is your dream outcome? Like you go to your high rocks, you do your thing, magic wand, what happens? And she told me, she was like, actually, I just want to not have that hip pain. Like, I don't even care if I pee my pants. It's not that much pee coming out. Like, and I'm internally like, what? Like, obviously we want your hip pain to go away, but what do you mean you don't care if you don't stop peeing your pants, like for this high rocks, which is, I think, like 2 months away or something like that. And so that's just an example of if I hadn't asked the question of what is your top priority? What's your dream outcome? If at the end of all this, like, what is your top priority that happens? And she hadn't said, well, actually, I want to be able to participate without hip pain. It's debilitating. It's preventing me from getting low in my wall balls because, in the competition, you have to get below 90, I think it is. And so if I hadn't asked that question, I would have had in my head, like, okay, we got to get her to stop leaking. And is the hip pain and the leaking related? Yeah, it was. And it still gave me language to be tying everything back to, which is kind of one of my points here that I'll get to in a second, tying things back to in my treatment, her why, right? Instead of saying, hey, this exercise is going to make you stop peeing your pants, I'm able to say, hey, like we're going to do this because this mobility issue in your hip is what's causing a lot of hip pain. Okay. And in my head, I'm like, it's also probably going to help the leaking, but it gave me the language to help her buy in and help her feel like I hear her and I got her. I understand her. So that's a big one that I don't want y'all skipping is yes, we need to ask better questions. Step 1, like hands down, ask better questions so you can start to form a hypothesis and know or start thinking what the root cause or causes are, what the main constraints are going to be that you're going to be tackling. But we also need to know our client's dream outcome because sometimes it is going to be different than what you assumed it would be. And that's okay. But that helps you and it should help guide your treatment choices and especially help guide your language when you're talking to patients and kind of explaining your why behind what you're giving them. So ask better questions, know the dream outcome, and then from there, once we've asked better questions and we understand the assignment, we know what their dream outcome is, that's when we start to form this working hypothesis from just the subjective portion, just talking to our patients, right? And so I want you guys using the subjective data to start to be identifying and thinking about what is one or two areas that I have to assess today, right? Like I have to assess the foot because this patient told me she rolled her ankle, I don't know, 50 times growing up playing soccer, right? And now she has hip pain on that side and is leaking suddenly, right? So there's an example, but use your better questions that you just spent time doing, and then use what you know to be their dream outcome to help you form this working hypothesis and help you start to map out in your objective what is non-negotiable, one or two areas that I am going to assess today, okay? Because I want to free you from thinking you have to do it all on the eval. You do not. You just need to do the thing that is going to move the needle in the eval. And this is the framework for how you're going to find that. Okay? And so we're forming a working hypothesis and we're kind of thinking this differential diagnosis about what are kind of the things, maybe one or two things that could be contributing to these pelvic floor issues in this patient, right? I want this hypothesis to guide what objective assessments you're going to do. I want you to look objectively and assess objectively at the things that are relevant to your working hypothesis, which again, your working hypothesis is based on your better questioning, okay? And to your patient's dream outcome first. Where do those two mesh? That's where we start with our objective. As much as you may want to assess something else, or as much as in your head you're like, yeah, but they told me to do this, this, and this in this order in the pelvic floor exam. I'm like, free yourself, because we don't need to do things that aren't aligned with what the patient wants and what you're already thinking that you need to rule in or rule out. Okay. As much as you may want to do that, set it aside, stay focused on the main thing, keep the main thing the main thing. You can get to everything in due time. You have many more appointments ahead of you where you can get to some of this stuff if it proves that it will be helpful and important. Okay. So we have started with asking better questions, step one. Then we have made sure that we understand the assignment. We know our patient's dream outcome, and we're not assuming we know what that is. We're not assuming it's that she wants to not pee her pants when really in her head, she just wants you to get her out of hip pain first and foremost. That's the only thing she cares about, okay? Then we are forming a working hypothesis with what are the top 1, 2, maybe 3 things that you're thinking based on your questions that you're thinking might be going on, might be causing the pelvic floor to be dysfunctional. From there, we're going to step forward. This is when we are going to rule that hypothesis in or out with our objective tests, okay? Your working hypothesis should drive your objective assessments. You do not have to do every objective assessment under the sun. You only need to pick the ones that answer your hypothesis, that either rule it in or rule it out. Say yes or no, you're right or you're wrong, right? So just like I was saying, if you think the patient's history of 500 ankle sprains might have something to do with her now leaking when she runs, assess the foot and the ankle today, okay? If that means you don't get to the internal pelvic floor exam, that's okay. Because like I said, you have a bunch of appointments coming up to get that done. But our purpose is to assess objectively and rule in or rule out our working hypothesis, okay? You want to assess the things that are aligned with both your working hypothesis and the patient's dream outcome. Resist the urge to do it all. Okay. So we've asked better questions. We've understood the assignment. We've asked the patient their dream outcome and didn't assume it. We have formed a working hypothesis of what's probably the top 1 or 2, maybe 3 things that is contributing or causing the pelvic floor to be dysfunctional. We have then selected our objective assessments based on that working hypothesis and their desired dream outcome. Okay. It's gotta be aligned with both of those things. And so, if you need ideas for your objective assessments, I have a whole course that has all of that in there. But, essentially you need to choose your objective assessments that's gonna rule in or rule out the hypothesis and is aligned with their dream outcome. And then the last step before we then go to step 6, which is not a real step, the 5th and final step is consistently tie all of your interventions and treatments back to their dream outcome. This is the one that a lot of people skip or miss or don't realize how important it is. But you guys, like when we understand the assignment, when we understand this chick only wants to freaking be able to go to her high rocks and not have her right hip pinching and hurting, and she can't compete in the wall balls because she can't get low enough because her hip is on fire and it feels like a knife stabbing her. If I'm like, oh, but you didn't pee your pants, that's a win. A win's a win. Not to her, because her main goal was be able to not have hip pain so she could do the wall balls and not get disqualified from the event or whatever, right? And so all your treatments need to tie back to their dream outcome. Do not skip this point. Every single exercise, every piece of education you give, every manual therapy that you choose should clearly support what they care about and what they came for. And you should be verbalizing that. Hey, remember, whenever I said I found that this right hip, it lacks some of that internal rotation. That's that pinching, that pain that you're feeling in the front of the hip. This exercise I'm giving you, we're actually going to open up the back part of the hip joint so you have a better ability to get that rotation, and that's going to stop that pinching, right? Guess what, girls? That's also going to make her not pee her pants, but I tied it back to her dream outcome, her pain in that hip that's prohibiting her from competing in the high rocks. Sometimes, right, you find multiple main constraints. You find multiple things that you're like, what do I do first? Right. And like with this girl, I had found she did lack internal rotation. She had some tension and trigger points kind of on those hip external rotator muscles. She had some tension in both of her adductors. She tended to be like a glute clencher. She did have pelvic floor tension on, it was on both sides, but it was more on the side where the hip pain was. She did have kind of some foot and ankle stiffness on that side. She had her thorax, her ISA was pretty stiff. It didn't move very well. Her rib cage was kind of just like clamped down. Pretty common presentation for our fit girlies, right? Is they're just like real stiff. And so I just named off a whole list of like 5 or 6 impairments that I found. And it's like, but where do you start? Where do you start? And the answer is, you start with the 1 or 2, maybe you have time for 2. You start with the one thing that is going to tie back the most to their dream outcome and support what you found in your objective measurements from your hypothesis, right? And so that's kind of the magic formula is, if you don't know where to start, pick the one thing that is going to get them kind of a win in regards to their dream outcome. So for her, day 1, I was like, I'm going to needle those hip external rotators, and I'm going to give her an exercise that opens up the posterior hip capsule and allows for better hip internal rotation, because those two things, the needling is going to help some of the tension and the pain. And then the exercise is going to improve that mobility, which is going to improve her hip pain. And then we'll be able to build on that from there, right? I'm talking about what I did in the initial evaluation. But whenever I was talking to her, I tied it back to, hey, I'm going to start with these 2 things. Even though we found, your rib cage is stiff, your foot and ankle are stiff. And y'all know I love to treat a good stiff foot and ankle, but I didn't. I resisted the urge to do it all, you guys. And I chose instead the low-hanging fruit of what is going to help her feel better or get closer to her dream outcome more immediately. That's actually going to improve their buy-in. It's going to improve their trust in your ability to do the dang thing and to be compliant with their home exercise program. Because if I'm telling her, hey, I'm going to needle this spot, this exercise I'm going to give you is going to make this needling work better, last longer, take your pain away, let you squat deeper on your wall balls, but you got to do the exercise. She's going to do the exercise. But even if I gave her the same exercise and I said, hey, this exercise is great because you're leaking because your pelvic floor is tight on the right side and because, you lack hip internal rotation and that's what's causing you to leak. So if you do this, it's really going to help with the leaking. She might do it, but she's in her head, she's like, Is this going to help with my hip pain though? So that's what I mean when I say like the language matters and tying it back to their dream outcome matters. And that's kind of how you can chisel away and choose, okay, well, what's the thing to start with today? Okay, next time. It's like a mini reeval. Every single time you go through these 5 steps, you ask questions, you make sure you're still aligned on their dream outcome, right? You're forming new hypotheses every single time because things change, right? You learn more stuff, you ask better questions, you learn more stuff. You're doing more objective assessments. It might be new things, it might be the same ones to assess progress, all the things, right? And you are tying then the treatments that you choose based on those assessments back to the dream outcome. That's the formula, you guys. That's what you do. And then I said step 6, which is not a real step, but it kind of is you rinse and repeat for the rest of time. That's what you do appointment after appointment after appointment. You pick the biggest constraint of the day, maybe 2 things. It depends on kind of how it goes. You tackle it, you get it out of there, you send them home with homework in regards to that, you've tied it back to their dream outcome. They come back, they're pumped because, oh my gosh, Becky, whatever you needled and whatever that exercise was, I haven't had hip pain in 2 weeks since I've seen you. Okay. And in my head, I'm like, okay, yes, that's a win. Like that is a step towards her dream outcome. She is bought in, she's excited, right? She's going to see me through her plan of care. And as we go, her dream outcome might change, right? Because if we've already treated her hip pain, now she's like, okay, well, now I feel like we could maybe address the leaking, and it's like, that's where I mean, whenever I say we rinse and repeat this process forevermore, every single appointment, every single time we talk to our patient, okay? And so we rinse and repeat kind of one constraint, one thing at a time. We tackle it. We tackle the constraint or the driver that is most likely driving the majority of issues that are preventing their dream outcome. We improve that thing, get the win, and we move on to the next. Okay. You will always be asking better questions throughout the plan of care, and you will always be reassessing based on your ever-changing hypothesis. That's how this works, you guys. This framework that I shared with you builds momentum. It gets you wins sooner that are meaningful to the patient, which improves their buy-in, improves their retention, both of which improve their long-term outcomes. And that's the game we're in. We want to improve outcomes and do things differently and do them better for our patients, right? And so this is how you do it, okay? So stop treating, please, based on tension versus weakness, based on diagnosis, based on what you think is the most important thing to start with, just by assuming, right? Ask better questions. Understand what it is that your client wants out of their time with you. Form a hypothesis based on your questioning. Use your objective assessments to rule in or rule out this working hypothesis, right, about these main constraints, main drivers. Choose the treatment that is most aligned with their main constraint that you have identified via your objective and aligned with their dream outcome. It's got to be both, y'all. Consistently tie it all back to their why, their purpose, their reason for seeing you, and then rinse and repeat for the rest of time. There's your framework, y'all. Hopefully that's helpful. If it is, it would mean the world to me if you would screenshot this, share it to your stories so that other clinicians can kind of conceptualize and learn this framework. If it got you thinking differently about your evaluations, but also just how we continue and progress through the plan of care, right? Share it. That would mean the world to me. That's how we live out, my value of being better together and changing the game. I can't do it by myself. I need you guys to help, and I need y'all to be sharing it. So I would love it if you would. I also always love whenever y'all DM me your biggest takeaway, anything you found helpful, inspirational, insightful, funny, any of that stuff. I'm always in the DMs chit-chatting with you guys. If you have case questions, I always love to help. So please, please, please don't be a stranger. It would mean so much to me if you would share this with someone, send it their way, put it on your stories. Either way, would love a tag. It always means so much and makes my day. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and let's change the game, y'all.